Hello there. Welcome back to Dr. K. Primer video lecture series presenting by Dr. K. Prem. That's me. In today's lecture, we will see what is necrosis and what is apoptosis. And also we will see the differences between the necrosis and apoptosis. Here you can see the definition of necrosis. Necrosis is a accidental death of cells and tissues in the living animal and plants when they exposed to extreme environmental or genetically coded insults. So necrosis is it happens in the living cells of plants or animals when they're exposed to the extreme conditions, extreme harsh conditions. But whereas apoptosis, you see, certain cells of animals and plants are necessary to die for the proliferation, growth, development, and survival of the organism. So the other side of the other cellular death pathway, apoptosis, it's a necessary to die certain cells in the animals or plants so that the proliferation or growth and development takes place. So the death of certain cells in a tissue or a organ or a system, they have to die. You see, apoptosis is one of the physiological cell death pathway in which dying cells shared many morphological features. The cells which are dying through the apoptosis have a common morphological features. Common morphological features. For example, if you see the common morphological features, the first one is detachment, cell shrinking, and membrane blebbing, and DNA fragmentation or other organelles enclosement, and formation of apoptotic bodies, and engulfment of these apoptotic bodies by phagocytic cells. These are the different morphological features. They are there in, we can observe these features. Any cell which is undergoing the apoptosis, irrespective of the cell type or tissue or organ, or even in the different animals. The same thing. These shared morphological features might be the result of an underlying common conserved endogenous cell death program. So the apoptosis or whatever the morphological features which are taking place when a cell is undergoing the apoptosis, that's all due to there is a common conserved endogenous death program. You will see in the, there is a cartoon here, apoptosis. Apoptosis requires the stimuli always. Cell doesn't undergo the apoptosis without stimuli. The stimuli for apoptosis is, it may be a endogenous process, endogenous stimuli, or exogenous. You see, the stimuli may be endogenous or exogenous. That can be a physiological stimuli or pathological stimuli. When it receives the stimuli in the from endogenous or exogenous, then there are certain things which are happens in the cell. For example, they're orderly, cell shrinking. This is a very, very, cell becomes small in size. Cell shrinking, DNA fragmentation, membrane blebbing, and formation of apoptotic bodies. These are the common morphological features you can see. They are orderly happening. All of them will happen in an order. There is no irregular or a disorder activities. You see, formation of apoptotic bodies. Some of the apoptotic bodies will have organelles. There is no fragmentation of organelles except nucleus. Remaining all organelles are enclosed in the apoptotic bodies. Whereas necrosis, other hand, necrosis, you can see stimuli is always exogenous. Stimuli is always exogenous, and that too pathological. That too pathological. So here you can see, in case of apoptosis, there is a shrinking of the cell. But here, the cell which is undergoing the necrosis, there is a swelling of the cell. You see? And disorderly breakdown of cellular components. There is no 1 to 10 events should happen. Always in case of apoptosis, cell dislinking from the neighboring cells. A detachment happens first. But here no. So there is no particular way of a necrosis. Disorderly breakdown of cellular components. And the release and the formation and release of the pro-inflammatory mediators. That is one of the clear and distinct difference between the apoptosis and necrosis, where in necrosis, pro-inflammatory mediators are released from the cell undergoing the necrosis into the surroundings, which leads to the formation of inflammation. And here, rupturing of the plasma membrane takes place in the necrosis. Rupturing. And you see, rupturing of the plasma membrane. Then release of pro-inflammatory mediators. So this is all about apoptosis and necrosis in respect with the stimuli, breakdown, and the release of pro-inflammatory mediators. We'll see other differences also in the next slide. Yeah, overall, you can compare the apoptosis, with the implosion. And necrosis is an explosion. Apoptosis is implosion, and the necrosis is explosion. Yeah, now we will see at least another 9 differences between the apoptosis and necrosis. The very first one is apoptosis is intrinsically controlled. Every activity takes place in the apoptosis is very much controlled within the cell. But necrosis is not at all. It is not. Apoptosis is more rapid. It hardly takes 12 to 24 hours. Certain cells, within hours, few hours, single digit hours. But whereas necrosis may take time from days to months. For example, liquefactive necrosis takes months together. Apoptosis induced by endogenous or exogenous stimuli. In the diagram, in the previous diagram, you have seen that always apoptosis stimuli is endogenous and exogenous, and it can be a physiological or pathological. Like viral infected cells also undergoes the apoptosis. The cell which is not having the growth factor, deficiency of the growth factor also leads to the apoptosis. So endogenous and exogenous. For example, cell is exposed to the certain harsh environment like radiation that break down the double-strand DNA. That also leads to the apoptosis. But necrosis is always induced by exogenous arms or pathological condition only. It's not a physiological condition stimulates the necrosis. No, not at all. Only apoptosis uh, in the cell, cells which are undergoing the apoptosis may receive signal from the endogenous or exogenous. They can be a physiological or pathological. Apoptosis is limited to single or few cells at a time. So it can be restricted to single cell or a few cells in that environment. And it occurs among a healthy cell population. Clearing of the particular cell, there are 10 cells. For example, only one cell is infected. Particularly that cell only removed or undergoes the apoptosis. Suppose B cells are formed, and which are the B cells or T cells which are having no antigen or no T cell receptor, B cell receptor or T cell receptor or self-reactive or non-functional. They're clearly removed from the system through the apoptosis. Means a particular cell which is a defective among the healthy population. Necrosis is usually more extensive and occurs in tissue exposed to injuries. It happens, it's a very extensive, it cannot be limited to the one or two cells. It is more extensive. As I told you in the beginning in the differences, cell cytoplasm shrinks in apoptosis. Cells, in case of necrosis, it's a swelling. Apoptosis is energy dependent. To undergo the cell through the apoptosis, it requires the ATP. Formation of apoptosome with the cytochrome C and caspases and apoptotic protease activating factor. So these are the three different factors to form a apoptosome, which requires the ATP for oligomerization. So, but whereas necrosis is not at all. It doesn't require the energy. Nucleosome of apoptotic cells are 180 base phase fragments. So when a cell is undergoing the apoptosis, the activated DNA cuts very specifically at the rate of, for every 180 base pairs, there is a cut. So when you run the gel of DNA isolated from the apoptotic cells, you can see the ladder pattern. Ladder pattern. So bigger ones are top and the small fragments are lower. So you can see a pattern. But in necrosis, you can't see that pattern. You can't see the DNA. DNA degradation is very randomized. Apoptosis has no inflammation. You don't feel the pain, or you don't feel the fever, or you don't feel the hot or temperature rising in when a cells which are undergoing the apoptosis. That is what is inflammation, right? Yeah. But while necrosis leads to the breakdown of plasma membrane and liberation of pro-inflammatory mediators. Apoptosis doesn't cause the inflammation, but necrosis causes the inflammation. Apoptosis has no systemic manifestation, contrary to most inflammation. So these are the 9 listed differences between the apoptosis and the necrosis. Hope you all like this lecture. So if at all, if you like it, try to subscribe channel, that's Dr. K PREM-PRIMER, and hence you will not miss the any updates from my channel. Thank you all for listening. See you again. Until then, bye bye.